avoid
We can't see what you just held up because you're blurring your background, but
a long yucky list. I said anything to avoid my actual to-do
your
list.
to-do list. Oh, that's good. That's good. This is the NeoBooks call for Monday, January 27th, 2025. Jack sends her apologies for studies are picking up. She had also mentioned, Jose, that you might not be able to make this call because it conflicts with times you've got. We should straighten that out and figure out what we'd like to do. And then also we were starting to get ourselves a little organized to be more focused on these calls. But Jack's materials were going to be a piece of how we did that. And I'm not sure that we have that right now to work on. Go ahead, Marc-Antoine.
Okay, two things. I have scheduled issue. I mentioned it in the chat. This for at least two dates, which I'm not sure whether it's next week and the following one or the one after that. So there's uncertainty, but there's definitely 2 times I cannot come on this schedule. I have made what I've been postponing for so long, which is here's what I think is a list of design goals for both NeoBooks and HyperKnowledge, and which ones do I think are common, which ones do I think maybe, and which ones do I think probably aren't, but it's something I'd like to go over with you, if you're okay with that. But is that the right session to do it? But I think it could be.
Sounds good to me. Laurent?
Anybody else?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Unfortunately, just for the record,
that's a bad way to start a pitch, the word unfortunately, but keep going.
Yeah. I'm working more and more in any type. And that means getting you, how's the share? Yes, this. Getting you to have access to this is it's perfectly doable, but it's a bit complicated.
Okay.
Maybe I'll make another copy or something. But this is my thinking space right now. So let's go first for the really obvious stuff. We're speaking about fractal granular knowledge. Nuggets can be combined in narrative form. A narrative fractality, a narrative element can contain other narrative elements. Is that a goal for NeoBooks? Is it just container nuggets, or is it fractal? I think it's fractal, and that's something I wanted to check. Jose,
I'm not sure what it means for knowledge to be fractal. So we may need to dive a little deeper into that.
No, this is what I think is important. Let's make sure we agree on the goals. But Jose seemed to say yes.
Yeah, in my view, the way that knowledge exists and the way it would need to be modeled is in a fractal way.
So my primitive understanding of fractal is that it is self-replicating, self-similar algorithmic functions, meaning fractality implies a likeness of function all the way down the turtles. And that I don't think that's what we mean.
Not self-similar, but functional likeness of similarity all the way down. Yes, it's absolutely what I mean.
Self-consistent. Yes, that's the word I would use.
There's a difference between self-consistent and the same formula replicated, which is my understanding of fractal.
Okay. The way I'm applying it here is if you have, we can say we can reuse elements in a narrative. So we have a container and contained elements, right? What I mean by fractality is each contained element can itself be a container with contained element and so on. And any element at any layer can be put at any other layer in another container.
That I completely agree with. I'm just not sure that the right word is fractality.
How about modular? You're building modules, right?
And composable?
Module doesn't ensure that there's multiple layers of modularity. You could have just container element, book paragraph, book chapter, stop there, and it could still be called modular as long as the only module level is chapter. Here I'm saying no, it goes down from chapter to section to paragraph to sentence to word to whatever.
Okay. And I'm happy to not resolve that right now and just keep going.
But I think we agree on, maybe we don't agree on the word, but I think we agree on the concept. And
yeah, it's just when you have to pause to explain something for so long, then it's a chance. Then chances are that other people will have that same issue, right? So if we want to share this,
I'm perfectly happy to negotiate the word. If you want to do it now, I'm okay. It's the other word I'd use is recursive, but recursive is very much a trade word, and I don't want to impose it on non-programmers.
I think I would say just keep going.
Okay, and reusability. So the notion that we can be a knowledge element can be reused in another narrative container by others. Of course, that raises all kinds of questions about legal aspect, license, credits. Credits is important. Is it reused as is? Do we allow modification? How does the modification interface with the original? And then we can get into multiple versions, but that's a separate thing. And if we are we inserting a live thing or a version? If there's a version, we should have a facility for updates. When we
I would argue that it needs to be a version.
I would too. That's also what I would totally go for. Excellent. So, and when we transclude a compound, obviously we're transcluding the components, but are we transcluding an awareness of the other relationships around it? That requires more thought. In the hyper knowledge context, content can be narrative or data. So frames can contain subframes. Of course, we can mix and match. A frame can contain text, text can contain frames, and so on. But that's one aspect. So that's the basis, is the fractal granular knowledge elements.
Cool.
I think we all agree we'll want non-text elements. That's a minor thing. I just like to get over it quickly. Multimedia, obviously, video, images, data structures, because that's the hyper knowledge case. Executables. Do you want like Jupyter notebook programmable elements, perhaps? Or QTI SCORM as an example, or simulations? That could be part of, like, do we want a way to include something that is not just static? Question, open question. But I'm just saying those are, when we speak about non-text elements, what do we mean?
I would say openness to all of the above as much as possible, but not necessarily designed originally.
Exactly. I would tend to agree with all of that, but these are goals. It's the aspirational and
yeah.
Distributed authorship. Anybody can propose an amendment and inspired by Git. I think we agree on that basis. There may not be a canonical version. Of course, when somebody originates something, they control whose pull request they want to include in the evolution of their version. But at another level, the content describes a concept, and the concept doesn't belong to anybody. There's multiple descriptions of the same concept. So nobody owns that. I don't think anybody should own that. That said, just a question of authorship and ownership I want to talk about here a bit more. It makes sense to have somebody be protective in some ways about saying, well, this is the version I approve, and this is the version I did not approve. Like if you have a trademark, or if you have, for example, the medical community has a definition of a certain disease, they should be able to protect that as an order. This is what we believe about this disease. Things like that, community or individual ownership of at least one definition. And this is not saying it's the only definition, but it's saying this is the only definition approved by this person or this group.
And if we didn't have a feature like that, then one of the principal use cases of this whole thing we're talking about, which would be two people debating a topic, wouldn't work well, because nobody could say this thing I believe in and this other thing I don't.
Yep. So I think that is part of the, so on the one hand, nobody owns an idea. On the other hand, you can say, yes, this is conformant. And of course, if you originated a piece of content, then you can decide, well, this is my stream of the piece of content, and I'll integrate what I want on it. And a community can decide to have collective ownership of what stream they authorize as a collectivity. That's and that leads to choral descriptions. again, following, I should say that here, but following Caulfield, if there's many pieces, there will be, for any one concept, again, there's a kind of, there's a non-adequation of pieces of content and concepts. And that's I'll get into more later. Piece of content may describe a concept. It may even be a glossary entry, but it's not the same as the concept because the concept is not owned in the same way. But that means you'll have many descriptions of an idea, any idea. For example, for different styles of audience, level of detail, presumed expertise, syntactic complexity, language. Here's the English and the French description, you know. These are all presumably valid versions of the same content without divergence of idea. It's just divergence of presentation. Sometimes it can go down to, there's a whole group who preserves this way of saying it and the other group prefers this other way of saying it. It's still the same idea. Maybe we'll want a tagging system for some attributes of different versions, academic level, prerequisites, whatever, but that's a maybe. We'll want to say, hey, this version is really, many people say this version is really clear and easy to understand. We'll want ways to vote for which version really helped me.
Love that.
What?
Love that.
Yeah. There's, it makes sense also to write slightly differently when the context is reset in another context. You know, I've said it in this thing, I want to import it. We said it was important to reuse, but maybe when I reuse, I want to change it to say, oh, by the way, this is a reference to this other thing I said before. So you need to transform it. Again, this is where it gets difficult with versioning, but I'll get there elsewhere. But it is something you may want to do as part of the chorality to rephrase in the context of this narrative. Maybe it can be just connective tissue between the elements, but sometimes it means rephrasing the unit.
Mm-hmm.
And where did I speak about that? Actually, let me, oops, no. It's probably in the backlinks, concept and content. Okay, concept and what is this relationship between concept and content? And I wrote that as a hyper knowledge concern, but is it a NeoBook concern? Many units of knowledge or units of content will describe a given concept. Oops, forgot an N. It should be possible to refer to the concept as a topic, independent of its description. Say, give me all the pieces that explain this idea. Give me all the pieces that talk about this idea. And not just about this version of this idea. It's not just backlinks. There's a kind of query. A unit of knowledge may act as a glossary entry, and there may be many such entries, choral descriptions, that's what I said. Many glossary entries dealing with different concepts might try to claim the same word to describe the concept. So the concept is not the word either. Like we can be using different concepts and say, oh, we call it fractal, for example. Oh no, we don't mean the same thing by fractal. So when that's the case, then we should, whenever someone uses the word fractal, they should get a little pop-up. Oh, by the way, people understand it sometimes in this way, sometimes in that way. Which one do you think you mean? That's a hyper knowledge concern, I think. But for me, it's an important one. This should be, of course, for practical reasons, be assumed to be persistent for a given user most of the time. Like I should say, when I say fractal, I always mean this one. Stop bothering me with pop-ups. And then if somebody forks, like if there's a new distinction in the one I've chosen, then it makes sense to ask me again, hey, there's this new distinction that's been established, this new scission of the community over what do you mean by fractal? Okay, which one do you mean? And sometimes the answer will be both or either, and that's fine also. This is about negotiation of meaning. What do you mean by? And that's a whole other thing. And we should be able to describe both this meaning, that meaning, and what is the distinction between them. And that should be a separate unit. This is related to negotiation of meaning. And okay, let me go first to negotiation of meaning. I want to be able to represent these conflicts of interpretation and distinctions. Again, very hyper-knowledge concern. I don't know if it's a NeoBook concern, but for me it is. Use both annotation interpretation, like being able to say, I think you mean this, and annotate that, and I'm checking, and some form of voting, saying, hey, look, so many people took it that way. Maybe you weren't that clear, or if that's not what you intended, maybe clarify, because many people did take it that way. And all this leads into handle concept and content drift, which is when the content evolves. This is the evolving. There's two evolutions. There's evolution of content. The content may fork and have different versions, choral versions, but sometimes it's, oh, the meaning's changed. Your version is actually saying something else. So what I was quoting and transcluding, maybe I don't agree with it anymore. In my transclusion, if I transcluded a version, I look at a new version. No, that's not what I thought I was transcluding. So I, again, identify the drift, say, okay, there's this version meaning this version meaning that, and allow to choose and so on. And if the content contains references to concept, maybe it's a link, but maybe it's just usage of a word, same logic applies. There's an implicit definition. Sometimes there's an explicit glossary reference, and then a misunderstanding should lead to branching the glossary entry and to replace the word by an explicit glossary reference if needed. And that's the negotiation of meaning. And this should feed into what I call the social view. Here going really the hyper-knowledge view is that when a knowledge element contains claims or even represents a claim, maybe we want a view that shows, well, here are the counterclaims, the arguments against, and the alternative claims. Like this is a different view that you should be aware of, that somebody disagrees and has this view. Especially when the claim is controversial, we should allow to see that. And you should always be able to choose. I want to see it as it is in my bubble. I want to see it as it is outside of, like, across bubbles. You should not be able to choose to not see across bubbles, but I think it is legitimate to say, okay, how is it viewed by, example, the medical community? I think that's legit. Or by whatever pseudoscience community you may be interested in. Note for NeoBooks, maybe we don't want to do this at federation scale, but within a book. If within the book there's many points of views that are being discussed and compared, it would make sense when there's a claim here to have on the side, oh, by the way, here are the other counterclaims within the book that are elsewhere if you want to jump around them. This is related to vetting. Let me go back to the list of goals. What did I not see yet? Interaction of flow and stock. We've spoken about this a few times, but some things, a book is a stock. That is, it's a coherent narrative about a piece of knowledge. It's intelligible through its curated structure. And the history of how that knowledge came about is less important than the structure, because the structure is emphasizing approachability, as opposed to flow, which is conversation and hence time dependent. It may not be as easy to understand, or it may be more time consuming because of repetitions, things coming out of order, assumptions, and so on. But flows feeds into stocks, and stocks rely on flow to grow, and flows rely on stocks to make reference to. For me, it's a hyper knowledge goal to be able to make it easier to take things that come in flow and say, oh, this should enrich this stock, and make it easier to enrich the stock from the flow, and make it easier for the flow to refer to the stock. Again, is flow a NeoBook concern? Probably not, but I'm just opening that this is in the list. What else was a NeoBook concern? Yeah, that's important. Annotation, interpretation, overlay. You may at any point have a knowledge element that is either an annotation or an overlay interpretation of another knowledge element. It can be exegesis, it can be just a comment, but it can be, I think they mean this. This requires internal reference, being able to refer to this piece of text. I think they mean this. That's what web annotation is for. Thankfully, we don't have to reinvent that wheel. In the case of interpretation, a separate process should allow negotiation of meaning. What did you mean? Oh, that's what I got. With editable knowledge fragments, reference may be fragile. That's a problem, but that's reality. Interaction with fractal knowledge elements may also be a complication. You want to speak about something that's in a sub-element at the upper level because it only makes sense to, your comment makes sense in the enclosing level, but you're still referring to that thing into sub-element, but that's just technical complexity. Do we allow reference structured data? That's a hyper-knowledge concern, or including if we have computational multimedia when I was speaking about non-text element. And for NeoBooks, for the core of hyper-knowledge is we allow interpretive elements to be structured data. Is that a NeoBook concern? That's an open question. But I think annotation and interpretation is useful for NeoBooks. Being able to do exegesis is a common concern. From the hyper-knowledge, since I'm dealing with data, of course, I'll worry about multiple schemas, schema pluralism. I won't get into details. Provenance is probably a shared thing. I should add NeoBooks here because we want to trace the history of contributions to a knowledge element, like Git history, both for interpretation, scholarship purpose. Do we want to get into cryptographic proof of authorship? I'm assuming not, or maybe later. Do we want to get into event sourcing? That's a hyper-knowledge choice. It may not be a NeoBook choice. But the notion of tracing contributions to a collective thing is obviously relevant to NeoBook. And there should be, where's the one about federation, tool pluralism, basically for a hyper-knowledge concern, we want a multiplicity of tools. I think it could be a NeoBook concern, especially if you're dealing with computational data, because you'll want a variety of computational data, of computational simulations, for example, to run in there. Accessing and enriching, do you want to allow tools to enrich a book? And generally, because there cannot be one tool to rule them all. So that's why I put that in the hyper-knowledge concerns. So this is a list. I'll export it somehow, at least, so we have a shared document we can work on. I just finished that today. I totally want to have, I may have forgotten things that are fundamental to the NeoBooks main goals, but I try to, this is my understanding of NeoBook key goals and how they interact with hyper-knowledge key goals. I hope that was useful.
It is super useful and interesting. Marc-Antoine, thank you. And it's funny because when I'm using Obsidian and pushing to GitHub, and then because of Massive Web Builder, yeah, I can push things to people as web pages. But I think this is basically a pile of notes on your computer. So it's harder to do that because it would be fun to collaboratively build this in a wiki style where these things actually link out.
We can make this collaborative. AnyType is a collaborative tool. I have my own AnyType sync server. You'd have to download the AnyType tool, and I'd have to guide you to connect to my sync server instead of the main AnyType repository. It's a bit complex, but it's totally doable.
Okay, but I would wind up using AnyType as an editor. I couldn't connect to the Markdown files through Obsidian, for example, in some intermediate way. Bummer. Okay.
I've chosen AnyType because it gives me the possibility to add object types and relationships and attribute styles to and so on.
Cool. Anybody else? Thoughts, comments, additions, subtractions? Appreciations?
Good, and good.
Is that like a law firm?
Yes. We work on behalf of the no good.
Ah.
So
defense lawyers.
coming in late to this ongoing group and discussion, is the thing that you're looking to solve, what is the application of it? Are you looking to publish, to make it a publishing format for content? And if so, what content do you actually most care about in priority? Is it academic papers? Is it fiction and nonfiction books? Like what is it, databases? What are you looking to apply this way of contextualizing and embroidering on?
There'll be two different version answers, because these are two projects. I'm trying to look at both. My hyper knowledge response is I want a global knowledge repository for humans to have transparent decision making. This is the discussion we had in the previous hour. We need to be able to have transparent decision-making factors and discuss criteria and discuss concerns globally. So I want a global knowledge repository. So that's my goal. Now, within I think some of that is part of the NeoBook goal, but the NeoBook goal has, from what I understand, I shouldn't speak for you, Jose, but there's a kind of intermediate step goal, which is reusable content for publication. So that is, let's publish units of knowledge which contain sub-elements which can be shared and reused across other units of knowledge. So it's more publishing commons. So it's not the same as there's a global view of the global knowledge, which is an explicit hyper knowledge goal. But there is everybody can contribute to this and reuse. What is it? What was the Apple slogan? Reuse. No, not the Apple slogan. It
Not
was
the Apple slogan.
The recycling
recycle.
slogan.
reuse, recycle. Yeah, but there was one for the maker community that was more collective commons. There was a collective commons version of that. But anyway, you see what I'm saying.
Do you have an example, Marc-Antoine? It's always great if you can look at something that is an example of what you're saying. I'm just starting a new NeoBook focused on Farm Bill 2025. So it would be great to see how you are structuring this and what kind of an outline you're proposing there. Do you have written something already that sort of fits into this?
No, I'm still working on the tooling. So the answer is no. But one thing I'm very much focusing on, like on the one hand, what you're doing with NeoBooks in terms of you're writing more modular books, and that's useful. And there's a licensing aspect that you're making it explicit that the components can be reused, and that's wonderful. That's already a good first step. And because of, I think you're using Git, that means it's easy to propose and to have a more collective authorship, and that's perfectly valid. What I'm trying to do is add kind of, well, first federation, so that we can kind of cross-reference with backlinks. That is, if I mention elements of, oh, I'm not, I think Klaus's argument helps me make this other argument, or I disagree with Klaus's argument here, I'd point to your book and you'd get a backlink that, by the way, these are competing ideas, or this feeds into this other idea, or whatever, right? There'd be somewhere on the sidebar, when reading your book, you'd have, here is where this idea has been reused, contested, supported, whatever. And there would be a kind of sidebar with the global environment. And what would that sidebar look like? I've spoken about the Kipu UX. Basically, you'd have, well, here's the causality links, here's the epistemic links, here's the value links, and you'd have little beads near the argument saying, look, this is, here it was used as a premise, here it was used as a conclusion. Here it was refuted by this counter evidence, and you'd have these beads with this meaning, and you could go from there to looking at these other things. And you'd also have a kind of thermometer of how many people endorse this, how many people endorse alternatives. Sometimes it's just an alternative as another way of saying it, but you'd have all this universe of there's this narrative and there's the hype. Often Jack speaks of not wormholes to another narrative that gives you another point of view on the same topic. So there'd be these wormholes, and I very much see it as at the micro-argumentation level. And for example, any term, it's like, oh, this term, we think somebody said, I think Klaus is using it in this way because there's this uncertainty on this term. And you could weigh in and say, no, I'm using it in this way. So that's the Klaus approved meaning of this word. But then when you're transcluding a piece from another book, oh, by the way, he was using it in a slightly different way. And here there's a shift because that author had said they were using this word in this way. And maybe there's a slight difference here, and we have to be careful when we do the import.
To put a little bit of use case framing around it for Laurent, who missed many of our earlier conversations, this thing is called NeoBooks only because books are well understood cultural objects. They're nice, shiny, attractive bait. And we think that smart people put their best ideas in books and then publish them, when in fact, books are kind of a trap for ideas. They serialize them and then they overprotect them with intellectual property protection. So part of the quest for NeoBooks is to rethink how ideas work in the world and to liberate the ideas and then let them be instantiated in a lot of different ways, maybe at different grade levels, maybe in different languages, but also in different media. So the products, the end products might be an academic white paper. It might also be a book, a nonfiction book, might also be a piece of a play or a statement in a play, might also be a presentation or a slide in a PowerPoint deck. And it might contain the same idea, just represented differently in each of these different kind of framings. So you could easily imagine that as a slide in a deck, it doesn't have a lot of words. It's got large font and some style or theme applied, et cetera, et cetera. But the idea is to make the ideas eminently reusable and then to have them be adjacent to each other in some useful and usable ways that buys you some of the things that Marc-Antoine was referring to, because the proximity of ideas is really important, even also the proximity of ideas that are in conflict with each other. To know that they're next to each other and that they're trying to refute each other is important in this space. It makes it more navigable. It makes it also easier for people to say, oh, I believe this and this and this and this, but not this and this and this. And maybe in so doing, maybe in us creating a trail of things we like, this is overly simplistic. But if a newbie came into this environment and started liking nuggets, the trail of things that they had liked could wind up representing a worldview or a set of things that they agree with, a set of statements that they would generally agree with. And they might also then use a downward thumb to dislike some things that they actively disagree with. And that could end up looking like a point of view or a worldview. And that would allow us to then compare those things a little bit better. Now, one thing we haven't talked about much, but is really interesting, is the nuggetization of existing texts. So if you were to take an academic white paper and say, how do we break this up into nuggets and then encode them or make them more available for use and reuse as NeoBook nuggets? I think that's a very interesting question. That gets into a lot of intellectual property issues right away, because if somebody else wrote it and they still care a lot about it, you're going to be chopping it up and sort of putting it in the Moulinex. But you're allowed to do derivative works. That's kind of good. And I'm not exactly sure how that works out. But I think that if we could have the body of stuff that AIs are being taught with right now, the vast corpus of knowledge that we're using to train all these LLMs, if we could nuggetize that and free it up to be used and reused by humans and AIs in really powerful ways, I think that's a very interesting future. I would like to see that a lot. Klaus.
So as usual, this all makes me think of the Knowledge Future group, right? And what Danny Hillis and those guys are doing in terms of making all human knowledge or information machine readable and providing, instead of answers, context. And so that's why I was saying, like, everything that I heard Marc-Antoine go through in terms of capabilities and options with ways. Well, first of all, I would argue that humans are very good at sharing ideas. I think we have a federation issue now of discoverability of ideas and of context of those ideas. But as humans are idea seekers and builders, and whether we realize we've built on somebody else or not, we're associative brains. But the flaw in the ointment is having enough to offer enough perspective or enough things to comment on. So that's why I'd love to see this. I'll make it up. It's a certain kind of Alzheimer's research paper, or it's whatever, some substrain of disciplines. Maybe try in a word concept driven thing like philosophy papers, and maybe try in a hard science set and see if this is applied. Does it actually accomplish anything? Like, are new ideas, are new questions generated? What is useful that comes out of saturating a body of content and disassembling it this way? Because I think you'll find radical learnings, and that will change then how you can apply it to a bigger and bigger thing. Like, if it makes you advance Alzheimer's research because questions and thinking is reformulated, and there's a history and a lore of attribution citation, then that's an interesting model for maybe more nebulous things, right? Like what kind of governance works when in humanity? What do we know? What is the body of knowledge, right? Anyway, I digress, but this is so robust and nice, but at some point, it's hard to apply to. You can't boil the ocean, right? Can't put it the context in, like, what is scannable? All of the articles in 4 peer-reviewed journals on, CRISPR are scannable. That's an achievable goal of going, okay, this is a very big, complicated thing. Is it useful to look at it with these tools?
Thanks, Lauren. One of the examples I use of things that are impossible or not impossible is, like, sometimes I think things just seem impractical. And as an example, I'm like, yeah, of course nobody's going to take a car with a camera on the roof and drive on every street in the globe and then stitch together all the photos and make them available for free online. That's impractical. And it's like, exists. So you never know. And metaphoric oceans occasionally get boiled before we know it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Klaus.
Yeah, so along those same lines, I was also wondering, do we have a target? I mean, Marc-Antoine, do you have a direction that you want to go? Do you have a topic that you would want to pick and elaborate on? So, I mean, in my world, I'm in the food systems and food system design, right? And when I look at the political environments, climate change driven issues we're dealing with now, food security, the fragility of our food system and so on, there's a lot to write about, and that's what I have been doing. And I think I'm on my 5th NeoBook to drill down into that topic. If there are ways to improve what I'm doing and apply a more structured approach, I would really welcome that. But I think we are at a time where we need to translate this, as Laura just mentioned, into something that is outcome-based, and that outcome should have direction, and particularly in the political mess that we're in right now, where is the lever that we can assist with? And that's really all we can offer is assistance, right? and by bringing knowledge systems together. And I mean, I'm setting up an AI project focused on Farm Bill 2025, and put this into language that is easily understood, right? I mean, into language that cuts across cognition and education and so on. So where do you see yourself go with that?
Jack, do you want to add? Because I'm getting a lot of questions. And
let's go through who wanted to jump into the conversation. So, go ahead, Jack.
I think Marc-Antoine, you should address Klaus, and then my intention is to build on it. So go ahead.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Okay. First, there's many aspects. This is obviously a big long-term project and too much for one person. I'm doing what I can. Right now, my main goal, I have 3 goals, short term. One is building alliances, and this is why I come to places like here. One is finding markets, and that's part of my answer to you. It's like, where do I think there are people who are willing to go through the considerable effort of being more formal about knowledge? The question of formal, like, it's very easy to write, it's very hard to write precisely. And the reason I'm so much into structured data is because I believe that structured data forces us to be more precise. And that's why I'm so much about distinguishing ambiguities, for me, the benefit is clarity and avoiding misunderstandings. I think the best application long-term is politics and governance, being able to say, what exactly are we proposing to do? What are the expected consequences? What are the concerns about unintended consequences? Why do we believe this is likely or unlikely to happen? What is the value of that? What are the trade-offs? This conversation for me should be in the open. And that means a lot of precision. And I want to get people used to the possibility of that precision being possible in a large conversation. That's my political long-term goal. Short-term, of course, the politicians don't have an interest in too much clarity because they gain by lying. I've thought a lot about the use of this in companies. Companies have an advantage to have a better understanding of strategic opportunities, whatever. There's been a whole current of open innovation, getting companies to work with their clients and suppliers to come up with a better, and of course, employees, to get a better find strategic understanding and understand the problems as they emerge and so on. And so there's been actually a movement for more consultation with the company's ecosystem to have better strategic direction. And here again, precision is useful. But again, it's often used for quote unquote consultation washing, because let's face it, the leaders don't want to lose the power to lead. I think, and you're asking me where do I expect to apply this? I think one strategic possibility is companies that have to justify their actions to an auditor or to stakeholders or to boards with a very clear, this is how we do things. I'm thinking, the ISO 9000, this is our process, and we're following this process because we've been audited that we follow this process. So I think companies that have to make a ISO 9000 plan have this huge burden of being formal about their process. And I think this is an opportunity where this considerable effort of formalization can be justified. It answers a real need. That said, my hope of making this in a NeoBook type environment, I believe the benefit of this in a large environment is the considerable effort of formalization can be crowdsourced. And that's the whole point. We can share the effort of formalization and again, get people to be more familiar with what it is to think more formally and more clearly, again, because the end goal is global governance. And that way, I do think that, yes, I hope it will help people find better answers to things like scientific research, but I think it will be more useful in soft sciences and governance and human endeavors where ambiguity is maximal than in fields which already have stabilized their vocabulary and their ideas. It might be useful when a new field emerges. I mean, this is about doing things for ideas that are still being negotiated and disputed and evolving. And that way, a lot of people working on formal thinking, ontologies, I know you, Laura mentioned underlay is doing RDF. And I think from what I understand, they still have this idea that the precise name of a thing is a thing. And for me, what's really important is no, the precise name of a thing is as precise as you've thought about it right now. It will change, it will evolve, it will drift. And the notion of conceptual drift is fundamental to, for me, the hyper-knowledge project. It adds a lot of burden. Being able to assume conceptual stability is makes things so much easier. I think it's part of our problem. We believe that meanings are fixed. They're not. And of course, they're not shared. So making that explicit is part of what I'm trying to do so that we can have a better conversation by, oh, here we might not mean exactly the same thing, and identifying all the stumbling blocks of misunderstanding, ambiguity, conceptual drift, and so on. Now, will that be useful to you as a writer? I don't know. But will that be useful as you and a writer in the dialogue process with other communities? That's my hope. It's when it's in the interaction that I think the value of this could be proven, not in the individual book writing exercise, in the book content negotiation, maybe. Over.
Marc-Antoine, did you want to show us a document or something, or do you want to let go of the screen if you're not going to?
Oh, no. Sorry. I just
So we can see each other a little bit better. Thanks.
I agree. Sorry.
Jack.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really fascinated with the NeoBooks project, and I said in an earlier meeting that I thought of myself as all in, but I do it from the perspective of a topic mapper. Back when I was working at VerticalNet in Palo Alto, I was allowed to join a team that was converting an SGML topic map standard to an XML topic map standard. And what I began to realize was that knowledge representation and knowledge organization go hand in hand. So you can use RDF and collect all the world's triples. A causes B, C causes D, blah, 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 all the way down to, the mean free path of molecules if you want. That's one way of representing the information, but now how do you organize it? Well, in the RDF world, they use something called blind nodes or B nodes to organize frames. And frames are what Marc-Antoine has decided is the center of the universe. And frames are not new. They started with Charles Fillmore in the late 50s at UC Berkeley with his case frames. He did case frame analysis. And in the 60s, Marvin Minsky said, oh my gosh, we can use this for computer vision. And so he wrote the seminal paper on frame-based representation through the lens of computer vision. Stanford then picked up and ran with that in a whole bunch of ontological projects. And eventually, RDF was invented. So frames predate RDF. When RDF came along, DARPA jumped on it, and it became the funding darling of the university aerospace industry. So I'm going to say, and this is really it's forgive me, but frames got the short shrift of the funding space age, and Marc-Antoine is reviving them, and he's reviving them for good cause. Now, frames can be, as I said, represented in RDF, but I'm a topic mapper, and I want to go to something called knowledge organization. In the space of NeoBooks, there's this thing called findability. Now you can use just plain flat text search. You do that at GitHub now, and it finds a lot of cool stuff, but it misses stuff, and it will miss because you didn't spell it right. There's all kinds of things going on. What there in the 70s and 80s out of MIT, there was a project called Reminder System. And what it was is it was an agent that watched you while you were writing, typing in a word processor, and it would say, "Oh, you're talking about climate change." Blam, and it would show you a whole list of documents about climate change. It was a reminder system. And so what I'm talking about is topic-centric knowledge organization. Knowledge graphs do that. The Underlaid project is doing that, but it's doing it with RDF triples. I want to give you a little bit of a hierarchy of knowledge representation. You're all familiar with mind maps. Mind maps are basically system one thinking. System one thinking is rapid. It's off the top of your head from your gut. You write a topic and you draw a line, and you write another topic and you draw another line. Okay, that's system one. Now system one / system two is concept maps. Concept maps ask you to slow down and put a label on the arc connecting the topics. Well, topic maps take you to full system two, where you have to stop and think about the arc, because it itself is a topic. Every relationship you can think of has a biography. It has provenance. Who discovered it? How was it known? What's the context of its discovery? There's a whole thing that goes with an arc, with the predicate in a triple. An RDF limits you to just linking to the triple itself, not to the subject of A causes B. So in topic maps, we have the freedom to say the relationships among the objects, the actors, are themselves topics. And why are they topics? They have a biography, and they can be contestable. So I am very interested in the knowledge organization space overlaid on top of the NeoBooks framework. And it turns out that Marc-Antoine's hyper knowledge gives me that opportunity. It creates the architecture that allows topic mapping and other analytical processes to occur at the same time. So that's how I wanted to build on what Marc-Antoine has been saying. Over.
Oh,
Yeah, that's very interesting, Jack. I was in a meeting with Gene Ballinger last week, and he has trained an AI to develop mind maps. So he can use Kumu and he can use Brain to develop a map, and then simply elaborate on that map and drill it down. So there is an AI capacity now that can assist in taking a topic, asking general questions about this topic, and letting the AI develop a draft map version, either for the Brain or for Kumu. That's phenomenal. I mean, I watched him do it, and he went through several examples. Now, for the brain, it feeds the brain, but the information doesn't come back out of the brain into AI, right? It's a sort of a one-way street. So the connection between brain and AI just doesn't organize itself in the way that the brain is organized for data. But that would be an interesting tool to use and apply. Marc-Antoine, if you have a specific topic, you can basically create a mind map that will give you an outline, of how you want to structure that particular topic and knowledge.
I quoted in the previous hour Caulfield on right now. AI gives us a plethora of reasonings, and that's good. I mean, reasonings are useful, but reasonings as artifacts representing reasoning. He calls it reasoning the noun. And what does a plethora, when there's a plethora of one thing, it consumes, it creates a lack of another thing because it's all flux. And what does plethora of reasonings, the noun, consume? It consumes reasoning, the verb. What will be scarce is being able to think about those reasonings, to reason about those reasonings. So that was last hour's conversation. A reason can be given for good or bad things. We'll need judgment, be able to say a reason may or may not be enough, may or may not be good. We'll have to be able to think about reasonings, and that's also part of the skills we'll need as humans in the 21st century is reason about reasonings and compare reasoning. Why is this reasoning more convincing than this one, more sound? What's the quality of the evidence? Why is that good quality evidence? Why is that a good thing we want? And so on. And this meta reasoning is a higher level, it's more difficult. And it's also a reason I believe strongly in making reasoning shape and structure explicit and visible in my ideal of information universe, because it's easier to reason about something if you can point to it and see it and touch it. So I want to show the reasoning shape in a text and vice versa. Explain also the reasoning with text, because not everybody will be used. Like learning to work with formal reasoning is a skill that takes time to acquire, but giving it a visible form will go in that direction, and making those visible forms kind of part and parcel of the everyday information consumption environment would do wonders if it could be made into a habit. And again, it's wonderful that people are using AI to create these things, but it needs to be what I fear is people creating reasonings that exist on their own and are not connected and compared to other competing reasonings. And so that there's not this meta reasoning applied. And I want to see that happen. And I understand it's true that one thing AI is good at is giving, oh, here's all the reasonings there, and giving us a kind of global map. So hence, but also we still need to engage with them. And that is, I see so many people producing maps. Who engages? Those maps are just also, in my experience, large, stunning, and will just preclude engagement because it's like, oh, do I want to know all these ideas? So the narration remains important.
Of course.
One thing, just before Jose, you start, one question I had for you. I gave up my list. We should go through it and say what's in scope, what's not in scope, according to you, according to Jerry, according to you, Klaus. Like I gave my definition of the NeoBook project. I'm not sure I put words in everybody's mouth. I'm not sure if that's accurate. I want everybody's story of what I got right and wrong about the NeoBooks project. Over.
And it's a great starting point. Thank you. Go ahead, Jose.
I can't hear you.
You are not muted by Zoom, but we cannot hear your earphones. Check, check. Nope,
Nope.
not yet.
Sorry.
Check what microphone your Zoom is paying attention to, maybe. Nope. How about sign language? Semaphore.
Chat. I don't know how fast you type.
Still not hearing you. I know. It's a mystery wrapped in an enigma. No, check, check. No, nope. Not yet.
Meanwhile, Klaus, did I capture your objection well, or do you have another, like you said?
No, but I mean, AI is a tool. Okay.
AI is a tool.
Saying a spreadsheet confuses you because it allows you to do too many numbers. AI, you use the AI, you check the outcome. Doesn't mean that you're not responsible for what it puts out, right? So the first thing you do is you eliminate what you don't think you want to deal with, and you elaborate on it, and you go back to the AI and say, give me these following corrections. It's a tool. And so to say that this tool is doing something to you is just not the way to look at it.
I think yes, and tools, the medium is the message. The tool is also inducing behaviors. Right now, people are using AI as a source of truth, and that is absolutely scaring the shit out of me. Like asking AI as if they were asking Wikipedia. It's observed in classrooms, contradicting the teacher. Oh, but the AI says this. It's like, yell hello. And it's also because AI is comforting and tries to be agreeable. What teaches you to deal with dissent? What teaches you to be critical? What teaches you to self-examine? You can do it if you've been trained by it elsewhere. And of course, it's a great tool when you have those skills otherwise. The question is, where do you build those skills?
But that's a different
Testing.
topic. That's a different
No, it's a
topic.
perfectly related topic.
Well, I mean,
No tool is neutral.
It's just like with anything, you got to learn how to use it. I mean,
That is absolutely
treat it as a
correct.
programming language. So I mean, I understand all these objections. I totally get that people are misusing it, or they don't really know how to use it. But it is a phenomenal tool that increases your productivity 1,000-fold.
Can you guys hear me now, or?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, I finally disconnected myself from the wireless.
Oh, good.
So sorry for that. If I may, I just wanted to, I know we're kind of over time, but I wanted to throw a little bit of a slightly different thought from the conversations that we've had today. First of all, love what you did, Marc-Antoine. I'm less focused on the formal and very focused on the practical. To me, the practical is what I envision as NeoBooks is possibly becoming, is what GitHub and Node Package Manager did for software, doing for writing, for information sharing, and not in a super formal way, but in what it allowed the average 16-year-old kid to be able to check in some code into the same repository system that corporations use on the day-to-day basis. That's empowerment.
Yes.
And for me to have a 16-year-old kid be able to contribute to a book, a digital book, possibly even a print book, but a NeoBook. And in so doing, in a composable, open source, democratic way. That to me is the vision. And the difficulty, the realities and difficulties of structure, I think are there for me as things to be overcome. If we had originally structured GitHub to the point where it needed to be as formal as what we are talking about, before a kid could go in there and create a piece of software, it never would happen. And it's those kids that have created the vast majority of software to date, open source software. So what I'd like to do is see that democracy in action. I want to see people write books in community, not as individuals. I want to see people contribute concepts, ideas, narratives to efforts to clear up things, not so that we can create more proprietary IP-based knowledge, but more open knowledge. And so how do we do that with as little formality as possible to the front end, but with as much formality as possible in the back end? That's the hard part. I don't know how to do that. And that's why I think we're all here. But because I think we can all imagine a very formal system, and we can all imagine a very informal system. And I think to really get the imagination of the people who we would like to capture their imagination, it needs to be easy and formal. And I could as easily add a TikTok post to it as I could write, a chapter on neuroscience or whatever, right? Like that. The idea is that it's something that supports any of the above. And so that's the exciting part for me.
I totally agree on the one hand that let me put it this way. The reason I care so much about formality is that we're speaking about combining ideas, using ideas as Lego pieces. I personally believe that text is not the right vehicle for this. I'm not saying it's not part of the vehicle, but I think it's not a good vehicle for comparing and combining, because text is made of words. Words are ambiguous, and that means, if you pardon me to stretch the analogy to breaking point, the knobs and holes of the Lego are never the same size, and you never even know what size they are. And the point for me to help people replace vague clouds by, and progressively, I mean, vague clouds have to exist. All ideas start informal. And I don't want to ask people to always write formal, because that's ridiculous. But help people transform an informal to a formal idea. Guide them along that path, because it's the formal ideas that you can really combine. Like pulling up an idea from somewhere else, ideas from somewhere else, is the match even working? You don't know until you've kind of polished them and made them work, and helping them do that is the step I care about. But that they're not contradictory. I think we agree. And there's no reason, there's no question that what you're planning is a step towards. But I think it's important that it should be a step towards that allows the next layer. And I do think for that, my small precondition is, do think about deep references. What happens to if I want to do a deep reference to a little bit of text in your thing, and then it gets edited? Does it live? Does it Does the deep reference get completely thrown about? And again, this is something that web annotation has thought a lot about, how to make references robust. We don't need to invent that wheel, but I think compatibility with web annotation is really important.
We have run well over our
Way out
usually
of time.
allotted time,
Go make dinner.
but it's been good. It's been really good. Marc-Antoine, thanks for starting us off so richly. And let's continue in this general energy and direction and trope. I like it.
Yeah, one last thing. We have to think about scheduling. Maybe we'll do it on the chat. We didn't get to that. If you want to dig into my list, we should just set up a quick one-on-one so I can set you up with my system. I'll put the instructions in the chat so you can come in.
Okay. And I think you're going to miss 2 Monday calls. Is that the situation? Because I don't know that we should go back to our 11 a.m. Pacific
Which would work
time.
for me.
That would
Which
work
would work
okay
for
for
me.
you. Jose, are you having conflict with this time now? The one we were just in? No. So this time works for you. You're muted, however.
It was Marc-Antoine that had the conflict, not me.
Okay. And Marc-Antoine, yours is not a durable conflict. Yours is just a short-term conflict, correct?
Yes. The problem is I'm not sure it's next week. It might be the one after.
Okay.
For 2 weeks.
Jack had the conflict because she's in Australia.
Yes, Jax is actually going to have a longer. We moved the call to later in the day so Jax could join, and Jax has just joined her program. And I think for a while, Jax is going to have a conflict with joining us at all, just for time commitments. That said, I kind of like having where the time is now works a little better for my days, so I'm kind of good keeping
Could
it
be
there.
pretty much any other day in the week for me.
But if we can bounce around to keep you in the call for the next couple of weeks, Marc-Antoine, let's do that. So we'll just sort of adapt a little bit. Let's use the Mattermost or whatever to
I'll
talk.
keep Mattermost to tell you when it starts. I think it won't be next week, actually, from what it's looking like. But
cool. And that means we can use next week to plan the next couple of weeks when you can't make it.
Yeah.
Also, Jerry, just I'm sorry, no, one more thing here. ChatGPT 4.0 developed the capacity to set up a project. And that means you can group train an AI agent. So you could literally have a group of us train an AI agent to be versed in whatever topic we want to take a deep dive in. I'm doing this right now with the Farm Bill. It's really fascinating.
Very cool. Oh, let's go back there also next time. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Ciao for now.
Bye-bye.
Drop in.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us.